Let's welcome another guest to the programme. And I did tell you a little earlier that I'd give you a secret. Not a secret, but an interesting fact about our Adam, producer Adam. Well, we're about to talk about the Bata Heritage Centre in East Tilbury, of course, connected with the Bata shoe factory. Did you know that our Adam's dad used to work there for a while because he's a designer of shoes? A shoe designer. Isn't that an interesting job? You don't get many of those, I wouldn't have thought. So there we are. Adam's dad is a shoe designer. That's the little fact I was going to give you. And he did for a while work at Bata, as so many other people have done over the years. Let's welcome to the programme Mike Tarbard, chairman of the Bata Heritage Centre. Mike, welcome to Your Essex and BBC Essex.
Thanks, Ian. Thank you for getting me on the show. It's really kind.
Well, you can't really talk about Tilbury for long without, of course, mentioning Bata, can you? And Thomas Bata's shoe factory.
Probably not. It was part of the history of the Thurrock as an area, really, yes.
Yeah. Take us back to the 30s then, and how on earth this massive shoe factory came to be in Tilbury.
Well, it was really due partly to a chap called Reverend Bown, who was a priest in Tilbury. Going back slightly before that, Thomas Bata did have some shops in Britain in the 20s, but he wanted to expand into the British Empire, which at that time was pretty vast. So he thought he'd open up a factory, but he had some problems with the Northampton shoemakers who thought that he'd be bringing in cheap shoes, and they didn't like that idea. So he came up with the idea of building a factory. So he advertised for land, and Farmer Wilson, who owned most of the land around East Tilbury, heard about this, contacted the Bata people in Czechoslovakia, and they all met. And this was in January 32, and they shook hands on a deal, and the contract was signed in March 1932. But there was a problem because it was all potato fields around East Tilbury at that time, and in the 1930s, depression, potatoes was the staple diet of most families. And the people were worried, the planning people were worried that what would happen to these potatoes, who would produce them. And so planning permission as we know it now was originally refused. But this Reverend Bound from Tilbury got to hear about it and went and saw, department of whoever it was, back in the 30s up in London, and explained that this man called Thomas Bata wanted to invest, and it would bring thousands of jobs to the area in a depressed up part of the country, work for people and so on and so forth. And he was very instrumental in getting the government to change their mind.
Wow. Then
in March 32, the contract was completed. And then, unfortunately, Thomas Bata himself was killed in a plane crash in July 1932. He was flying from Zlin in Czechoslovakia to Milan in Switzerland to open a factory. And it was a bit like the Glenn Miller story from World War II. He was told he shouldn't fly because of bad weather conditions, but said, I've got to fly, I'm opening a factory. And they did. And unfortunately, the plane crashed and he and the pilot were killed.
My goodness. So he never got to see his vision, realised?
Not at all. It was taken over by his half-brother Jan and the rest of the family. And that's the history of it. East Tilbury would have happened, but it happened a lot earlier because of what Thomas Bata wanted to do.
And how many people were working at the factory at its height?
At its height, probably 3,000-ish at East Tilbury. But then if you look at the country as a whole, there were other factories around the country. There were shoe shops in every major town. And when you added all those employees in, we're probably talking about 5,000 to 6,000 people working for Bata in Britain.
Right, so a huge name, and still a brand. Actually, you see, I was in Spain the other week, and you still see the name on shops. It's more of a brand still in other parts of the world, isn't it? Even if not
Europe,
here.
certainly. I know I've seen the shop in Rouen in France, and I think there's a shop in Florence and Rome. But of course, Africa, Asia, the Far East is littered still with Bata factories, Bata shops.
Right.
So yes, it's still a well-known product around the world, still run by the Bata family. So they're keeping that name going.
Yes.
The incredible thing is, though, when you go to places all around the world, in Prague, for example, in Czechoslovakia, the home of Bata, there's a 7-story shoe shop. and it's quite amazing to go in there.
I bet. And do we know why, Thomas Bata from Czechoslovakia, why he came over to the UK to do his thing with shoes in the first place?
Well, primarily because he wanted to break into the British Empire and into that market, which gave him at that time the Africas, India, Pakistan, Canada. It gave him a much bigger outlet than he would have had in Czechoslovakia.
Right, so it was opening up that market. And his sort of style of doing things, I mean, I've seen it sort of described as sort of copying Henry Ford's conveyor belt system. I mean, is that what made it successful, the way that he laid out the factory through his designs, and his family then carried out his wishes and did that kind of conveyor belt style system? Yeah,
I think you're absolutely right. You've obviously done your homework. He went out to the States to see Henry Ford, to see how they made the motor car, and saw the conveyor belt system and thought, we can use that in shoemaking. And that's what he did. He brought that into shoemaking here in Britain and elsewhere, with other factories. And it made it so much faster. Gone were the days of the cobbler making a pair of shoes himself, right from the very start of cutting the leather, trimming it, stitching it together, and so on. Everybody had a part to play in the making of a pair of shoes. And if someone was off sick or came in late on that particular day, there was potentially a problem on the conveyor. And I believe I'm right in saying that there were other key workers who could fill in. So if somebody was off sick one day, the foreman, for example, would go in and he'd fill in on that slot. Otherwise, things would grind to a halt.
Right. So a very well-timed precision detail, I should think, to get it all right and going. And your heritage connection now, the Bata Heritage Centre that you're chairman of, Mike. I mean, what's the aim? Why are you there? What do you hope to achieve?
Can I just go back to the beginning of that? The story of that was in 2002. A lady called Winifred Price, who was the manager of the East Tilbury Library and a local historian, thought there was a story to tell about Bata and East Tilbury. And he got a few of the widowed ladies around, and they gave them a table and a few chairs. And they started talking to people just to get the memories. And then people started coming saying, I've got this artefact and that artefact, would you like it? And before they knew it, it actually sort of spiraled out of all idea. And they got so much stuff they didn't know what to do with it. Today, we're trying to keep that good name of Bata going. We have a very strong connection still with the Bata family. They've been very good to us over the years. And members of the family come to visit us from time to time, which is great. We try to spread the word. It's amazing, though, Ian, you go places and people haven't heard of Bata, hadn't heard of them being in East Tilbury. You know, we go out now and we give talks to U3As, WIs. We have visits from those sorts of groups, from students at various universities, particularly of architecture, because of the modernism style of architecture that there is in East Tilbury. So we do all of that. We have 2 open days a year. We had one the Saturday before last, where we open up, or we use part of the old factory building, and I must say thanks to One Big Storage, the current owners of the site, who let us use part of their facility for our open day. This year we had this time round I should say, we had a 2-centre. So we had the part in the old factory building, and then we were in the afternoon and during the morning, but particularly in the afternoon, we were in the library where we are based. So we're just trying to keep the word going as to why East Tilbury happened. What are those funny 5-storey buildings that are there?
And finally, I have to ask, Mike, why and when did the shoe factory close?
It closed in 2006 finally, and the irony here, Ian, is it was cheap importation of shoes.
The very concerns that people had in the first place about Bata.
Exactly. They just couldn't compete with what was coming in probably from China.
How interesting, as you say. Yeah. The irony of the full circle, really, of the tale. And thank you for sharing it with us, Mike, and keep up the good work at the Heritage Centre.
Can I just give us one more plug in, if I may?
Of course you can.
We have an open day next year. It's a long way off. On Saturday, the 25th of April, So if anybody wants to come along to it, go to our website, Bata Heritage Centre, and you'll find details of it on there.
The 25th of April. Free. OK. Mike Tarbard, lovely to speak to you. Chairman of the Bata Heritage Centre based in East Tilbury. Really interesting. And I'd like to hear from you. We know that Adam's dad worked there for a time. He's a shoe designer. Carol Ann has texted to say her late dad, worked there for a while too. Did you have any connections to the Bata shoe factory?